All right. Having said this, I hope that everyone can see my screen and it's working. Maybe Christina, you can give me a sign.
Yes, all good.
All right, then let's officially start the CDQ webinar on data strategies. I'm very pleased to welcome that many people on a very important topic, data strategies. We've formulated the subtitle of why is a data strategy a must-have for the data-driven company. And actually in this webinar, we would like to give you reasons why this is the case. And we would also like to give you some practical insights and good practices, which were all generated by the Competence Center Corporate Data Quality, CC CDQ. And actually today you have two speakers. The first speaker is Christine Legner. She's a professor for information systems at the University of Lausanne, and she's the academic head of the Competence Center Corporate Data Quality. Christine, nice to have you with us.
Looking forward to share some of our insights on data strategies.
Right. Thanks. Second speaker is me. My name is Tobias Pentek. I had the community and innovation activities in the Competence Center, and I'm your contact in case you do have any questions around CDQ and the contents or also participation options for you and your company. Before we start, just a quick announcement. You might have seen that this webinar is part of a series of several webinars which we have initiated in the last weeks. Actually, there has taken one other webinar already place, which is focused on the data excellence model. In case you're interested, on our YouTube channel, you found a recording of this webinar. And after today's webinar on data strategies, there will be another one coming up on data catalogs. As you all attended, I'm sure that you know how to register, and actually that's the way to go to. But for today, we would like to focus on data strategies, and actually there's 4 objectives we would like to achieve. You should learn first why companies should have a data strategy. Second, you should understand what a data strategy is and what it should comprise. Third, you should also discover and understand where European companies stand with regards to data strategies. And fourth, you should learn how to build your company's data strategy. And actually, all these questions were already raised, discussed, and addressed in the Competence Center Corporate Data Quality. And that Competence Center is a quite unique community of data experts from leading companies and also renowned research institutions. That Competence Center has been founded in 2006, so there's a lot of knowledge of 14 years around data and data management practices, and that Competence Center members all aim for driving innovation in the data domain. And actually, in the last year, the Competence Center issued a study on data strategies, which seemed to be a topic of mutual relevance and interest for many companies in our Competence Center. And what we did was conducting an in-depth interview series of 25 companies all over Europe. And today we are happy to present you all the results of this study on data strategies. Actually, there's already the written documentation available for the German-speaking people in the call, and the English version is currently under preparation and will be published very soon. Having said this, I would like to get started, and actually I would like to address the first question which we would like to answer, which is, why do companies need a data strategy? First, short answer to that question is because in the Harvard Business Review, a quite renowned and well-known magazine addressing executives, there has been published an article already in 2015 saying, what's your data strategy? And actually that article addresses executives, detailing them why a data strategy is a must-have actually. And the very last sentence of that report, which I really highly recommend you to read, that's the reason why we integrated the link, the very last sentence of that report is that companies who do not yet have built a data strategy have to catch up either very fast or they have to start planning for the exit. So do now or die. That's actually the reason. And that was like for us the starting point to also deep dive into the topic of data strategies. And in our studies, we we could identify on a more detailed level 5 reasons why we think a data strategy is the must for every data-driven company. And I would like to guide you now through the next through these 5 reasons for having a data strategy. First of all, what we all know and see is that data somehow has made it to the boardroom. Data seems to be a topic of big relevance. Why is it the case? Data has the potential to really generate business value. Data can generate business value actually in 3 ways: through database products and services, through data-driven insights, reporting and controlling, and through enabling business process excellence. And actually the first 2 blocks, database products and services and data-driven insights, reporting and controlling, are somewhat new to a certain degree. And actually they really contain a lot of potential to generate value to the business. So the role of data is actually changing. And back in the past, it was just enabling business processes. Now it's really of such an importance that it has to be managed also on a strategic level. And actually that implies for data strategy as a first implication on the topic is that data strategies need to define the future role of data in a company's business model. Reason number 1. Let's take a look at reason number 2. Actually, reason number 2 is related to business process excellence. I already said that also in the past, data was fueling business processes. However, even though we all talk about data quality for decades now, we all know that there are still some issues, some challenges related to data quality. And also rather recent study indicated that only 3% of all companies' data meet basic quality standards, implying that there's quite a lot of room of improvements. And that's also the case. We do not have to talk about the sexy data science use cases and the great benefits, but also a data strategy should address that data defects today hinder digitalization. And actually, a data strategy should really define responsibilities and measures for a sound, good data foundation. Reason number 3 is actually associated with a lot of initiatives going on associated with data. We all know the buzzwords of AI, artificial intelligence, ML, machine learning, of data science, with all the big promises. And typically what we see in large and global organizations is that there's a lot of people exploring these technologies and algorithms. However, what we see is that typically these use cases are done in a siloed or initiative focused way. And actually what a data strategy should support is aligning these local initiatives and really should support the development of skills, the infrastructure and organization centrally, because typically it does not make sense to invest in these technologies, in these skills or infrastructure for a single initiative. But from a broader company-wide perspective, this typically helps and creates a large benefit. 4th reason why we should talk about data strategies and why they are a must is that we all know that data resides in silos. There are functions, there are systems which people understand as their own owners, and actually where people do not want to really open the silos towards the broader enterprise stakeholders, meaning also that this challenge has to be overcome, and actually that a data strategy should pave a way to what we call the democratization of data, in the sense of that data of the company should be made available to everyone in the company. 5th and final reason why we have identified that the data strategies must have in current times is that with the raising and growing role of data as a strategic asset, regulators and lawmakers have also become aware of data. And actually, there's a lot of general data privacy regulations, for example, in the EU, the general GDPR requirements on treating personal identifier data very sensitive. Or there are industry examples, like regulations, for example, like the IDMP in the pharma industry, or a Basel regulation for the finance industry, which all impose significant regulations on data. And actually, these cannot be addressed by single functions. So these have to be addressed by a central response. And actually, in here, a data strategy should also translate these regulatory requirements into actions. And actually, these are the 5 reasons why we consider data as a must-have, or a data strategy as the must-have to be considered for all of you. And what a data strategy in detail is and what it should comprise will now be presented by Christina.
Thank you, Tobias, for the reason. So my take now is to give you a little bit an idea on what a data strategy actually is. We know why it is important. And the interesting observation that we have is many people have an idea what should be in a data strategy, but oftentimes this is very specific. So if you ask people working with data science use cases, they are focusing on those and perhaps the potential they can benefit with these data science use cases. If you ask a business intelligence team and business users, perhaps they think about democratizing data and having nicer tools to also visually depict the data universe that you have in your company. If you ask IT, they think about tools and data lake infrastructure or some master data management tool, for example. If you ask data managers, they think about data quality and governance. So ultimately, what is actually a data strategy and what should it comprise? Probably all of that, but in a kind of organized way. If we go to literature, interestingly, there is not a lot of definitions around data strategy. And I have depicted 2 here on the slide. On the left side, you find a definition by the MIT CSIR data board. This is a board of chief data officers that defines data strategy as a central integrated concept that articulates how data will enable and inspire business strategy. So it's a very business value oriented definition. We think that this is certainly right, but on the right-hand side, you see a broader definition. And we are convinced from what we have seen in companies, but also from our research activities, that a data strategy must not only address the offense side, so what we can do with data, but also care about the data foundation. And this implies actually that it answers 2 types of questions. First, how a company will use data to generate value. So really understanding what exactly is the data inside the company and how you can use it, be it through data-driven insights or business processes or completely new products. This is the first part, which we also call data monetization. And the second type of answers should be to the question how a company manages the data to generate this value. And this is what we call the data foundation. And it's about how we collect, how we store, how we process and distribute data to the consumers. So both aspects need to be covered in a data strategy. And a data strategy oftentimes also depends very heavily on the current state of a company and the data maturity. So it's probably, you can create a strategy or try to create a strategy that is far from where you stand currently. But typically, the strategy should be aligned to your level of maturity also. And we're going to see some examples later on. But before coming to the examples, I would also like to mention that a data strategy does not stand alone. But typically, in a company, you have a number of strategies. So here you see a little bit the strategy environment. And a data strategy has to hook or build on a corporate strategy. So the enterprise or typically has a business strategy or digital strategy that describes how the business or how the business will actually attack the market, what the products are, and so on. And from there, you typically can derive goals for the data strategy and the frame for the data strategy. On the other hand, there are a number of other functional strategies or divisional strategies, and a data strategy should be somehow aligned with them and also provide the frame. So we can have an enterprise-wide data strategy where the define some, for example, the data use cases, how we want to monetize data, but also data foundation. And then we can have more specific strategies, for example, in marketing, how we're going to use data in marketing or in supply chain or in a specific business division. On the other hand, typically a data strategy has a lot of mutual dependencies with IT strategy, because IT strategy has to provide tooling. So there's always also close alignment on that side. What is the key message from this is basically a data strategy is not just there. It has a frame. And what we see, especially in more mature companies, we are going to discuss this later, is that data strategy becomes part of a periodic strategy process that already exists in many companies. Okay, let's move further and look a little bit where European companies stand today. So as Tobias also already mentioned, we have conducted a lot of interviews, and we have been observing actually data strategies in companies in the Competence Center for probably more than up to 10 years. And if we look a little bit at the results of our study, I would like to give you a brief overview on the status. So interestingly, at the moment, a lot of companies are developing a data strategy, 2/3 among them ones that we interviewed for the first time, or they developed the data strategy in the last 2 years. So there's a lot of activity going on data strategies. And we had in our sample, however, quite a certain amount of companies, 1/3, that already had a data strategy before. And what they currently do or have done is to completely revise it to take into account the new competitive environment, the new role of data, but also the many more ways of using data with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on. If we look at the scope, we actually see that in scope is all types of data in the enterprise, and that's huge, as you know. So it's not only master data or reporting, as sometimes in the past, but also increasingly unstructured data coming from sensors, but text or from the web, and also not only internal data, but also external data. So companies start thinking explicitly about external data and make it part of their data strategy. Another observation is that obviously all data in a company is huge. You have to define a scope. So what is most interesting? And there are two approaches. Either they specify specific data domains, we're going to see an example in a few minutes, or they act more opportunity driven. So they identify use cases, lighthouse projects, and emphasize the data that is needed to make them work. So be it predictive maintenance, be it digital marketing, they define these areas, and this will drive actually also the data scope that they have in their data strategy. If we continue, a very interesting observation is actually how the ownership and sponsorship for a data strategy. So data strategy typically involves people from a large number of units in the enterprise. If you develop it, typically you have business people, data, and IT. And there are some facilitators typically, and we saw quite often actually that corporate development or also enterprise architect were a little bit these orchestrators. Then we saw that mature companies have sponsors and owners at executive board level. So they're really top management support to drive these endeavor, and these sponsors are typically quite active and also pushing data and communicating about it. So and that brings me to the last point about development and iterations. I already mentioned that mature companies oftentimes have started their strategy, the data strategy, as master data or BI strategies, and have evolved in iterations over time. So we have seen quite a number of companies that have that made that way, but also others. And then finally, we have seen that many of these companies see a data strategy and its implementation as a journey of several years, and they track not only activities but also KPIs and the financial value that they create through their activities. Good. Let's look at 3 examples, very diverse. I will only quickly address them. So first one, it's Deutsche Telekom, German telecommunication, that created a chief data office that has the mission to help the organization leverage data assets to its full potential, but in a very complex organization. So this group basically was created to create synergies and alignment on use cases that are most relevant for the company. They framed this picture of a mountain that they would climb, and the main focus was on data analytics, so especially around customer data cockpits, but also use cases in the customer service domain. And this group basically focused very opportunistic on these high level or high value use cases. But it also had to address other topics, more general ones like data architecture and models, especially creating a common customer data model, creating skills and culture to actually make the company work with advanced analytics also, and lastly, data governance. So this data strategy was really not a very top-down. It was more like we create a unit, a chief data office, and should provide synergies and alignment. If we compare to the next example, which is the example of Philip Morris, they had a different starting point for data strategy, and that was their business transformation. You might be aware that the tobacco business is moving into more, let's say, electronic and so-called smoke-free products. So there's a major business transformation going on, which requires the companies to understand customers better, to have it actually gives them direct access to the customers. And there are also new product categories, IoT devices, in a way that also produce data that can be analyzed in different ways. And that business transformation created the need to actually, for a company that had never cared much about data, to think about a data strategy. And Philip Morris defined their dual data strategy that addressed analytics delivery as comprising descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analytics, but also data foundation. So creating the foundation for the company to understand actually what data is had and to deliver it in high quality. Okay, if you think, or if you look a little bit into the activities of this data strategy over in their journey, what they did, they addressed data science, but also business intelligence, data management with topics like creating data ownership processes, but also care about data quality, and then architecture. So building a data architecture with also some data catalog that would help business people to understand data, data scientists to find data. So this is the dual data strategy, a very nice example. And the last example that I would like to briefly mention here is Schaeffler, automotive supplier that has a long tradition already with a data strategy. So they are highly mature, come from the master data domain, and actually build on a relatively strong organizational data management practice. But their data strategy is basically extending the data management to more than 40 data domains that also comprise sensor data, for example, or all types of, let's say, more innovative data fields. So to support digitalization in many ways of the company. And if you look a little bit at what they did, so they have a strong focus on data management, but addressed basically defined a vision, a mission and goal, a framework, so how they would actually proceed, and streams as well as a collaboration model throughout the enterprise. So they emphasize more the data management piece, but bring it together also with groups that are mainly data scientists. So these are 3 examples. What can we learn from them to actually build a data strategy? And that brings me to the next section, which is basically what should a data strategy comprise and how to build one. We have seen that the data strategies that we have analyze, they always comprise a number of similar building blocks. And we have tried to bring them together in a so-called canvas. And actually, we are, you have perhaps heard of the idea of a canvas, or have used the business model canvas or the lean startup canvas or others. They are very popular, or have become very popular these days, because they break down a complex topic into elements, and they help representing different perspectives that need to be aligned. And they help also structuring the discussion. So in our data strategy canvas that we have developed, you find the building blocks of a data strategy. And our data strategy canvas basically has different parts. Overall, it has, or it starts on the top with some parts that are actually defining the strategic frame. So a data strategy always needs a trigger, a need for action. So why do we need to have a data strategy? Then typically you define a vision, so the aspiration for data, and what is the data's future role in the business model of the company, or as support for operational excellence. And there are choices to make. So you make in your vision, you say, okay, this is that's our vision. That's where we actually want to be. It should be somehow inspiring for people so that also buy in. On the other hand, you have seen that some of the strategies have missions and scope. So here it's basically defining the mission for your data program, organization, initiative. So where you briefly state what actually you want to achieve within a specific frame, and also setting the scope. We have seen some examples for the scope previously. So either through use cases, or you've defined, for example, data domains that are specifically important. And part of that upper level of the data strategy canvas is the business value. So explaining how data creates value, how data defects perhaps also destroy value, and what the value contribution in general is of your initiative, and putting that in business financial terms, for example. So once you have clarified this overarching goal, it's about actually defining key capabilities that you need to build. And these key capabilities typically comprise more organizational aspects, like, for example, the people, the skills, the roles, responsibilities. We have seen data ownership, or also helping data science teams to work. We know that some processes have to be put in place, for example, to analyze data demand, or to basically deliver data products. We have also seen that data relies on applications, be it master data management, data catalogs, or also data lakes. So there are specific applications that have to be put in place. And a lot is about architecture, finding a good architecture. So these, a key part of the data strategy activities is typically defining where you stand, but also where you want to be. And this then define key capabilities oftentimes give the key focus areas that you will work on when implementing the strategy. Next part is the code of conduct. As we work with data, we have to increasingly be aware what we are able to do it, or what we want to do it, what the values are in working with data. And the code of conduct thereby is an important aspect of a data strategy, and describes the culture related to data. And it's important internally for employees, what they can do or not, but also externally, especially if you have customers, for example, like PMI or others that are sensitive about what you're doing with your data. Last but not least, there's a transformation piece. A data strategy has to somehow state how it will achieve, or how it will build the key capabilities. So this is the transformation piece. So data strategy typically has this roadmap that describes a little bit in which steps you are going to address the topics and build your capabilities. If you want, you can actually see this canvas on the one hand as one, let's say, overarching view on all your data related activities, but you can also see it as a method, so how to actually define a data strategy. So there's an inherent sequence that you would follow if you would start a project to define a data strategy. So need for action, start with that, then define a vision, mission, scope, and business value, then work on where you stand in terms of the key capabilities that are needed and define a code of conduct. And then you would go on to transformation. And finally, you would probably, have to work on cultural communication and change to make this transformation happen. So this is a little bit from my side, the Data Strategy Canvas as one strategy tool that may help you in defining your data strategy, and also some examples. There's awful lot more to tell you about all these examples, but I will hand over to Tobias to do the wrap up, and then we are also open to your questions. So if you have questions, then you can already also start typing them in the screen, in the chat, sorry.
All right, Christine, thank you very much. So we've learned quite a lot on how mature or very good companies define and develop their data strategies. We have seen with Data Strategy Canvas one model or framework which can support you. In addition to that, actually, when we reflected on the insights of the study, what we came up with was a checklist of actually 10 recommendations which we would like to give to you as a checklist to develop your own company's data strategy. Actually, I do not want to read out all 10 items. As said initially, all participants receive the documents presented today after this webinar. But I would like to make some highlights, and I would like to address a few topics which are from our perspective of utmost importance when defining data strategy. First of all, is item number 3. Actually, data strategy is nothing which can be done by one person, by one function, or by one silo. Actually, a data strategy development works only well if data experts, IT, and business stakeholders work together. Second thing I would like to highlight, and that relates to checklist item 4 and 5. Actually, what we have seen is that strategy development can come from a bottom-up approach or from top-down. So either based on use cases or by defining or reviewing other strategies and defining the goals. And actually very good, very impactful strategies follow both ways, taking a look at the tiny details, but also always keeping in mind the strategic perspective which has to be taken. And that's a recommendation I would like to give to you, really keeping in mind the tiny details, but also the big picture. Another item I would like to highlight is that, well, a data foundation or data strategy should be somewhat balanced. We have seen the dual data strategy of PMI, which is for me a very good example of balancing rather traditional data foundation topics around data quality, around data governance, but also data monetization related topics related to use cases and all these sexy data analytics topics and science topics. And final remark I would like to give is item number 8. If you have a data strategy developed, that the process itself is very beneficial and helpful, but it's not only about the strategy itself and the contents. At the end of the day, it's not only a strategic plan, but a data strategy is actually a communication tool. During the development process, you will involve many stakeholders from your company, and afterwards, it also helps you to communicate what you're about to do, what actually the entire company is about to do. And that's why, from our perspective, a data strategy is of such an importance. Having said this, I would like to take a look jointly with Christina at...
Yeah, I can already read out the first question from Bettina England. Hi, Bettina. So she asked about how long does it take a customer to implement a data strategy on average? That's a very interesting question, actually, because it's hard to answer. In a data strategy, you typically outline your vision about how you're going to work with data, and that vision evolves also over time. So what we have seen is the companies that started 8 to 10 years ago, they are still basically revising their data strategy to further evolve and develop. So I don't know whether you can actually state a number of years for implementing a data strategy, because then once you are at a specific level, you are going to adjust or you're going to further develop. So at least it's like a company strategy. How long does it take to implement a strategy? It's difficult. But what we have seen and what may be helpful is that oftentimes companies take between 1 to 3 year, let's say, iterations, so strategy iterations. They say for the next 1 to 3 years, and that depends a little bit on the company itself. Sometimes they have these, for example, a Swiss railway company has strategic processes where they revise typically their data strategy or their strategies in general, and every strategy has an expiration date, and then it basically gives you the mandate to work on that data strategy for the next X years. So I think implementing a strategy is nothing that goes just in a few months. It's a journey. And from our experience, it's typically, so 3 years is something that we have seen quite often as a time frame. For example, PMI that did a very radical shift also. They had made great achievements, but even after 3 years, they are not done. So they're just then adjusting and doing the next steps.
All right. We have one further question coming from Safwan Kotwal. How would you look to implement a data-first culture in an organization that may be reluctant to adopt new ways of working? And how important is changing the culture to help the strategy? All right, that relates very much to a data-driven culture. How important is it? It's from my perspective of utmost importance. I said earlier that a data strategy is somewhat a communication tool, and also the development process already includes communication activities. And in a data strategy, as we have seen in the canvas, there's that need for action. And actually, that's the first thing where we really need to understand the current situation, where we really need to motivate everyone within the company on changing the current attitude towards data. And actually, it is quite difficult having reluctant people to convince. What we have seen is that very mature companies work with lighthouse projects or use cases, which somehow should give the rest of the organization a good feeling on which benefits a good and well thought data-driven approach can provide.
But what we can also say is that the cultural aspect is really in all the companies that we have been seeing very important. And typically the difficulty is that also people that are spread. And so if you want to really create something, a culture in a larger organization, you have to bring people together that like to work with data, that are passionate about the topic. And we have seen some companies that create their friends of data or data communities. And if you are in an organization, I think at least you have to create this nucleus and perhaps start working with them in order to then perhaps convince also a larger organization.
All right, we have another question asking, would an assessment of data-related risks be a good driver to initiate the design of a data strategy? And would, for instance, reputational risk be a good start? What we have seen, or what we tried to demonstrate, is that we have identified in general 5 reasons why companies should address a data strategy, and one of the 5 reasons was actually regulation, and that relates to that one. But what we've also seen is that that typically motivation for data strategies can be fostered through regulation, because companies have to do anyways something to comply. However, it typically also helps not only to have a stick in your hand, but also to have a carrot. So what we have seen with mature companies is that they try to avoid risks, they try to mitigate risk within the data strategies, but there's also a business value perspective coming from the more business value-oriented use cases. All right. Taking a look at the clock and no further questions in the chat field as of now, I would like to invite you. If you do have any follow-up questions after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to us. And actually, what I would also like to announce is that there are several ways of staying in touch with Christine, me, and the overall CDQ team. So actually, the next opportunity will be a webinar held on data catalogs, defining how to manage data actually as an asset from a tool perspective with a data catalog. Second option can be that you can attend one of CDQ's academy sessions. So actually all the contents which CDQ has created in the last 14 years are structured around the data excellence model and taught in 3 two-day modules for interested data managers, either newbies to the data management domain or to experts who would like to refresh their experiences. And actually, there will be an online format taking place on September 1st to 3rd. Registrations is still open. So if you would like to learn more about data architecture, lifecycle, and applications, you can register for the CDQ Academy. And third and most interactive part of staying in touch with us would be becoming a part of the CC CDQ expert community. In case you're interested, we're more than happy to get your information. And having said this, I would like to thank so many people attending the webinar. It was a pleasure having all of you on board. You will receive the documents afterwards, and I would like to follow up, would like to see many of you on the data in the data catalogs webinar in a few weeks. But for the time being, I wish you a good and pleasant day and have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye also from my side. And if you have good examples for data strategy, then let us know. Always a pleasure to work on that topic. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.